Over. Yes, Shloka.
Thanks, Anshu. And I'm going to actually sort of start with the two hats that you mentioned that I wear. I'm also going to try and build on a lot of what my, fellow panelists have spoken about. So let me put on the corporate hat first. And Anshu, if we run out of time, I'll bring in the Indian philanthropy and adaptation piece maybe later on. But as a representative of Indian corporates, as an ecosystem enabler, our goal really at the ICC has been to build that domestic traction around climate change. So you can imagine how existential a question something like net zero is for us. Is it going to set that ambition amongst investors and funders? Is it going to ignite those crucial sectoral transitions? Is it going to fill in those ecosystem gaps or mainstream the conversation, like Arunabha said? Or is it really just going to blow up in our face? And I think the reality, as you can well imagine, is a little more complex than these two binaries. So in terms of emerging or disruptive sectors like EVs or renewable energy, alternative fuels, we need more policy stability. We need economic signals that do encourage a green transition, to encourage more players to enter, to invest, and to innovate. I know what an important role signals like this play to the stakeholders that we work with. Um, but net zero may, by 2050, as CEW's research suggests, may actually be more of a burden on the economy than a booster. So we do need to find a commitment that walks that tightrope between supporting innovation and growth and actually being achievable. I think most importantly for ground level action, it's really the steps that will accompany the net zero commitments. So much is needed for this. Just to give you a few examples, you can choose literally out of a hat, discom reforms. We need to reform the agriculture sector, waste management. We need public transport upgrades. And these are things that even aside from climate, we've not managed to do. What Navroz calls the low carbon development pathways. Take air quality as an example, right? The EPCA, or the Environmental Pollution Prevention and Control Authority, was dissolved. It lapsed, unexpectedly a couple of months after it was formed. So now we have a governing body for air quality in the country, and we've decided that we want to sort of declare net zero. So I think a key element here is actually trust. We do need to, make sure that when we're making the commitment and we're not actually going to meet that target, it's just not something that we can afford to do. We do need to steer away from making legislation and not implementing it. And the only way net zero can be truly feasible is if it's set out, to a reasonable date and it's accompanied with a strong action plan that supports economy-wide transitions. Interestingly, the ICC actually conducted a survey of corporates recently in our energy scoping study. And from that survey of respondents, actually, we discovered that most don't want to upgrade our NDCs. They actually feel that India is already being ambitious, more ambitious than a lot of developed countries in setting those targets. And I think what this really means is that, they do feel that there's a lot of work to be done on the current commitments before we commit to overly ambitious global commitments. The energy sector, for instance, still needs to undergo an overhaul. Right now, we're just adding panel capacity, but we do need to think of grid upgradation, energy storage, policy stability, discom financial health. It's not just about increasing gigawatt capacity. So ideal long-term targets are meaningless without realistic short-term actions and a roadmap to build towards those targets. I think this is something, all of us sort of agree on. The last point that I want to make here is a key point about collaboration, which the Honorable Minister brought up, and I can't emphasize that enough. Sectoral transitions are a roadmap, and I think a must to enable a collective vision for pro-climate reform. Collaboration is really an important part of this process in order to enable that knowledge sharing and best practices. I think really net zero is not a climate conversation. It's about agriculture, it's about our cities, it's about industry, it's about transport, it's about how we will transform the power sector. It touches everything. And it needs to come to a point where organizations who don't work on climate change start talking about it. How much are we really working with development sector experts, social sector experts? How much are they talking about it? And how do we work to mainstream that? So working collaboratively is really a key factor here. And of course, it's going to bind India in a long-term trajectory. There's nothing that could be more important. So this year or this moment is actually very ripe to establish connections with those we haven't yet. Anshu, how much time do I have left? Otherwise, I'll just pause here and hand it